And we're back with another episode of Legends of Lake Howell. Today, have two very special guests with me to discuss the 50th anniversary of Lake Howell High School. We have Miss Cindy Frank and Miss Lalon Grago. Thank you for joining me. So before we start, I just want to talk about the interesting bit of history that Miss Grago actually shared with me about Lake Howell's opening. So we didn't actually start here on Lake Howell's campus in 1974. How did that start?
Well, I understood that the original year where there were freshmen and sophomores that were drawn from overcrowding in Lyman and overcrowding in Oviedo, they started as an afternoon session at Oviedo High School's campus, while this piece of land was being worked on so that the buildings would be ready for the next school year.
Now, I understand that, Ms. Frank, you were a student at the time. So what was that experience like going in the second half of the day?
It was great. I always said as a teacher that when I became a teacher that if they ever had to do that again, I would take the afternoon session. So yeah, it was awesome because we did all of our athletic practices in the morning, but they weren't like super early. And then we were still home at a decent time. I always said between 3 and 5. I don't really do too much as a student when I get home, right? So I loved the afternoon session. It was great. And I think most everybody that did it with me loved it.
So did you have any athletic teams at the time, the first couple of years?
It's for the girls.
Uh-huh.
But they did have all the boys football, but for girls, swimming, track and field. I ran track. Never, I did pretty good at it, but I hadn't been a plan like that. There wasn't, I played softball outside of Lake Howell in 74 with an organization on a junior rebel team, but
Just bring it closer a little bit.
So, but then the sports picked up as the year went. So they had everything by my junior year.
I understand that you were coaching back then. So were you coaching Miss Frank's team, one of her teams?
That was interesting. My first year, I was asked to be the assistant swim coach. And then the next year, I was asked to start the girls' volleyball program. And so Cindy was one of my junior stars that year. And that was it for me. And I then had my first child that May. And we had what we called our sports banquet in like January, and the athletic director at that time made some comment about, that I was the first volleyball coach and, it was great that we got the girls started and so on. He said, but we've found that we're missing one piece of equipment that you didn't turn in. There's a volleyball missing. And of course, I had the volleyball under my shirt, according to him. So it was a fun time. And we started with T-shirts that we ironed numbers on because we didn't have uniforms. So I was very glad that they got those the next year.
Good story on that one. We got our new uniforms, and Joe Luciano was coaching that year, and I ran under the bleachers to get the volleyball that went under, and she always thought I was gonna, up to something. So she yelled at me, and I came out from under the bleachers and ripped the brand new jersey. The first day we were trying them on, so she had to let's forget that.
So, Ms. Frank, you seem to be quite the athlete. What sports did you do while in high school?
There were track, softball, volleyball, basketball.
What was your favorite?
Basketball, because I had played softball and stuff so long, and track, I didn't run my senior year because I already knew I was either going to go on a softball or basketball scholarship to college. So I didn't run my senior year, but.
So you got a basketball scholarship. To what school?
I went to FSU and played for the Knowles, go Knowles, and I also went to UCF and transferred, so go Knights there.
Miss Grago, now what did you teach? What subject?
So I had biology, all different levels. And then my last 8 years here, we had developed a course. Let me back up. We also added in health as a half credit because that wasn't part of the PE program at that time. And so that was a really great class. I got enthused and started a paramedics club because we wanted to train people on CPR. And I also had the first blood bank bus come here for donations before we even had ROTC, and I was very happy when they took that over. But eventually, I got a class that we started that was called Earth Space Science, and it was a great class because we'd have ninth graders through seniors, and it was just an extra credit of science that kids could get, and it was a very, I'd call it a practical class because we learned about weather, we learned about geology, volcanoes, earthquakes, we learned about space, and we learned about oceanography. And I became, at some point along there, the queen of field trips here at Lake Howell High School because I would get to know my kids, but then in January, we would end up taking 3 field trips. We would go to Epcot, we would go to the Space Center, and we would also go to SeaWorld. Lots of great times.
So you mentioned, as we talked earlier, that you had an opportunity to work with Mr. Gaines, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Duncan. Now with Mr. Gaines and Mr. Evans, we see their names around the campus, but what was it like to work with them first as a faculty member and then as a student? Any memories you have of the two of them?
Well, Mr. Evans was always a very kind person to work for, and he always talked to all of us about the fact that the hardest thing for principals is that you get into so many situations where there's a gray area, and you have to make those decisions about which way you go with things. That it's fine to make a set of rules, but there's always going to be that gray area somewhere along the way. And Mr. Gaines, I always used to tell Mr. Gaines that I would come up with an idea and I would discuss it with him so that he could think about it for a while, and then he'd come back to me and he'd let me know that his idea was going to work. And we got along fine that way because I knew that he would take the input, but he would have to come back with a version that was his version of that idea. And that was fine. It worked out, and we still made progress.
Ms. Frank, any experiences as a student?
No, I agree with her on pretty much everything she said about Mr. Evans. I mean, just always a really kind, nice guy. You know, as a kid, you know, just unless you're in the certain group that deals with the principal a lot, you know, I'd have more things to think of, and it was a while ago. But Mr. Gaines remained a good friend of mine throughout my, you know, as a kid. He just was always there for me. Just like, you know, if I needed something at school or something came up, he was just always a good guy to me, you know. And then when I worked with him, he always helped me. And he worked with my parents a whole lot when, the athletic director, my parents started my junior year women's high school basketball tournament that they eventually had schools. They continued it after I graduated, but we ran a high school basketball tournament that brought teams from all over and coaches. It became pretty well known for coaches to come to Lake Howell to recruit. And we were real involved with the community at the time. So that's how my parents got into the Hall of Fame, because they kind of did a lot with the boosters and that. And Frank was involved with that. But Mr. Gaines was always there cheering us on.
Lake Howell, 50 years. If you can sum up the 50 years in one word in terms of your experience, what would that one word be? Or if you need 2 words, that's fine. But what would you say?
Go ahead.
Change.
I think of it as progress. It's definitely been progress. We started with the big round buildings that I used to put my plants along the sides of my science room because the roof leaked so much that they'd get watered anytime you'd have a rain shower. And so that's why that all had to disappear. And we went through, when I was here last year, and we started with the new science building, that was my 3rd new biology classroom at Lake Howell. And of course, my first one's gone, and the second one was upstairs overlooking the football field. I called it my skybox, and that one's gone now. Now it's a new parking lot.
Right, yeah.
And the new one in the new science building is, great. I kind of miss having windows in those inside rooms, but that's okay. It's still progress. And the one thing that I kind of regret that we didn't pursue was the one year that we had Lake Howell High School at Winter Springs, and we did the 4x4 plan that year and the first year that we came back, because I'd been teaching 20 years and I thought that was amazing. You took 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring, and you basically did them like college classes do. And the kids only had to prep for 4 things. So if they had a job or they had a sport or whatever, they weren't as overwhelmed as having 6 classes or 7 classes. So sadly, because they couldn't seem to figure out how to work out the AP stuff, alternating schedules or something, they just ditched it instead of doing the 4 years that they were going to do so that they could get the results of what did we really learn out of that. And I always was sad that one.
It was a great, for teachers and kids, if you had a 9 weeks class, you only went, a semester class, you only did a 9 weeks. You had a full year class, you did a semester, and then you switched it. When I was at Brantley, that's the 4x4. We were on at Brantley, and the kids loved it, and we loved it. But yeah, there was problems, I guess, with it somewhere. I don't remember what they were, but that was a great schedule. And the kids got a lot of, it was nice as a biology teacher because you could do your pre-lab, you could do your post-lab, and then you could do all your follow-up all in one period most of the time.
Yeah.
And with general ed bio kids, it was important to do it all together.
And what was amazing was people would say, "Oh, an hour and a half class? Oh, that's really a long time. Well, we do an hour and 40 minutes now, alternating schedules."
Right, yes.
Ours was 2 hours at Brantley.
The difference is that kids have 7 classes to worry about. That's a lot.
Yes, it is a lot.
It was different. I didn't start teaching as soon as she did, so it was a 2-hour block at Brantley for a while there, and that's how they did it. The 9 weeks in semester, so. But you had that longer time,
So we had some changes over the years.
Yeah, a lot of change.
When I retired originally, we had 6 classes. And so you had a planning period and you had 5 classes. And then when I came back, other than to visit, and I started doing classes, all of a sudden it was, well, now we have a planning period, but we have 6 classes. So, interesting progress.
And the very last question, if there is something that you could say or give a message to the students in the Lake Howell community, what would you say to them?
I would just say, kind of what I would tell kids if I was still here is that take full advantage of what's in front of you, because you have great teachers. There's so many different jobs you can do when you get out of school, and we were so limited back in 74, 78 period when you got out. It just, you don't have to go to college now. It's like you can do technical, I don't know, there's just so many things. So I would just say take full advantage, check to see what all the classes and take one for fun, even if you're not sure, because I know when you take a drama class, it really brings those kids out of their shells, and I encourage my granddaughter to do that when she was younger, and it's good for them to do. So I just say take full advantage of everything at Lake Howell Culinary. I mean, there's so many things, so they have so much to do.
Well, I would, and I still do, I say to kids the same motto that I had in my classroom. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. Because, they arrive as freshmen, and then they progress through those 4 years. But once they really realize that they've learned a lot in those 9 years from kindergarten to 8th grade before they get here as a freshman, but it's what they're going to continue to learn that's going to really develop all those skills and all those interests that they have. So keep learning.
And we'll end with that. Thank you for joining us for today's Legends of Lake Howell episode. Again, I would like to thank Ms. Frank and Ms. Grago for coming out. And as always, go Silverhawks and stay Hawk strong.